Okay, hi everybody. This is Michael Butterman. I'm music director of the Boulder Philharmonic Orchestra, and I'm joined today in a little Zoom discussion by Leslie Scarpino, who's our principal trumpet, Matt Diekman, who is a member of our viola section, Chaz Weatherby, who is our concertmaster, Nancy Smith, who is the artistic director of Frequent Flyers aerial dance, and Charles Lee, who's our principal cellist. And all of these persons have something in common besides a connection with the Boulder Philharmonic, and that is that we all participated in a very special event just about 3 years ago. In the late March of 2017, the Boulder Philharmonic traveled to the Kennedy Center in Washington, D.C. to open up the very first Shift Festival of American Orchestras. That is a festival that is designed to showcase innovative programming, but also especially orchestras that have kind of redefined or shifted the paradigm for what an orchestra ought to be in the 21st century in terms of connection to its community, in terms of embodying a willingness to connect classical music, or what we call, basically the canon of great orchestral music, to 21st century listeners. And the Boulder Philharmonic was very, very, I think, honored to have been chosen to participate in this festival and to, in fact, be the very first orchestra that has participated in it. In fact, this year's festival was canceled because of the coronavirus, and I think we were, of course, fortunate to have been able to make that trip together some 3 years ago. So I thought what we would do is just kind of talk a little bit about maybe what it meant for us to be there, and also a little bit about the program itself. And then if you watch this video, and then there's another link that should be nearby this video that will take you to a special video that is a snippet from an excerpt from that performance at the Kennedy Center. And there's some other excerpts as well that we have on our website and on our YouTube channel that you can check out as well. So maybe we just begin with the question about what it was like for an orchestra like ours. First of all, not everybody understands that there are orchestras and there are orchestras, right? So we were there with the Atlanta Symphony, the North Carolina Symphony, and a chamber orchestra in New York City called the Knights. And we were by far the smallest budget orchestra of those. And in fact, our orchestra is comprised of musicians who are putting together their lives in myriad ways. Many of them are cobbling together different freelance jobs, of which the Boulder Phil is just a very small part. Other persons might have teaching positions like Chaz does, and almost everybody is probably teaching privately as well. What, I guess, let me just ask you this, what did it mean, do you suppose, for us to be representing all of the orchestras like ours in this country, of which there are many, 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 and to be there with an orchestra, let's say, like the Atlanta Symphony. Anybody want to take that one, Leslie?
Yeah, well, that was my first season in the orchestra. And so I had moved to Denver because my husband got a job in the Colorado Symphony. And so I took the audition because, there was an opening. And I saw the schedule when I won the audition, and it said Kennedy Center on the schedule, and I thought it was a mistake. Or that maybe there was, well, not a mistake maybe, but I thought maybe there was maybe I was making a mistake in my head. There was some Kennedy Center somewhere in the greater Denver area that I hadn't heard of or something. But it was true, it was real. We were going to the Kennedy Center, and just to play there with the Boulder Phil was so cool, partly because I had friends show up in the audience that were playing in National Symphony or in the Kennedy Center Opera Orchestra, and coming up to me after the concert just saying, "Your orchestra's great, that you sound fantastic. Wow, I had no idea that the Boulder Phil sounds like this." And I thought it was really cool to represent smaller orchestras in that way, because there are, even though we might not have as big a season as some of these full-time orchestras, we sound pretty great, actually. So
Well, I mean, the distinction is, there are orchestras that rehearse during the working hours, right, 9 to 5, and then there are orchestras like ours that are rehearsing in the evenings, and that means that an orchestra like the Atlanta Symphony or the National Symphony, those persons are making the bulk of their income is coming from playing in the orchestra itself, and in our case, persons are, as I said, putting together. They're living through lots of different ways, but yet there are so many more orchestras of our size and ilk in this country than there are, let's say, like the Atlanta Symphony or the National Symphony. Um, I'm wondering, Chaz, she was talking about, being there at the on the stage of the Kennedy Center. That's a place that you know well from your time as principal second of the National Symphony. And of course you also know Mackey Auditorium well. Was there? I mean, maybe you could just talk about the difference, if there was one in your mind, between the sound or the experience itself of being on that stage versus what we experience when we're in Mackey Auditorium, for example.
Sure. First of all, I mean, for me, it was a really interesting and kind of emotional experience to return. As you mentioned, actually now 30 years ago, when I finished school, I was fortunate to get my first job in the National Symphony. I walked out on that stage actually twice to audition for the job, once as a member of the first violin section, and then shortly after I arrived for the principal second job. And I remember, I mean, maybe just being when you're young and you have a kind of enthusiasm and a kind of an excitement that as you get older can be lost. People sometimes say when they go to some of those orchestra concerts by the New York Philharmonic or the Boston Symphony or others, that they don't always sense the excitement level of the musicians on stage matching what might be taking place. I don't know. So going back with the Boulder Phil, the fact that for many of us, this was a first time to play in the Kennedy Center with an orchestra, for members of our community who came, there was such a higher level of intensity to the emotion. And as I said, for me also, just returning to that was really a very kind of overwhelming experience in some ways. It was also interesting because the Kennedy Center had a complete renovation in the mid-90s. So when I played on stage there, it was a much different acoustic, and it was frankly a very bad acoustic to perform in. We used to struggle as an orchestra a lot. The renovation that they did, they took everything down basically to the concrete walls and then rebuilt the concert hall. It's a much, much better concert hall than it used to be. And you asked about the comparison to Mackey, where we play all the time. Well, I think there is a certain kind of, through familiarity, maybe, I don't want to say that you take for granted, but you certainly know what to expect as when you walk on stage in Mackey as an orchestra. We know how we sound. We know how the sound coming back to us from the hall, we know what that's going to be like. So the Kennedy Center it was new. It was a completely fresh experience that we were all, I think, in real time looking up and listening and thinking, wow, this is really a tremendous opportunity.
Yeah, and we didn't have a lot of time to adjust either. We had just really one single rehearsal. Yeah, Deke.
Yeah, that was my perception of the experience too, was that there was so much excitement about being there and actually being on a tour and feeling like we're in the major league, and go into the real venue. But then we had such a small amount of time to get used to it, to get used to this newness and the bigness of it, and kind of swept up in the excitement and everything. So I remember feeling like, wow, well, that rehearsal's over. Okay, so now I guess we play where it's going to have a lot of people and the sound is going to be that much different again. When people are in the hall, the acoustics change again. And so we have just all of these different scenarios that we're kind of adjusting to on the fly. But of course it was great. And as I've been sharing that video that we've been working on with the Appalachian Spring, and I shared it with a colleague of mine who's a trumpet player who actually plays with the Knights, and he sometimes subs in with a lot of the New York big boys and stuff. And he said, "You all sound great." He was like, "This sounds amazing." So, it's, yeah, there are different levels of professionals, but we're all doing the same thing, and we're all bringing that emotion of the music out, and that excitement that Chaz was talking about, and like everyone being on point for the moment and with the audience, and that carries a lot of weight.
Yeah, Chaz.
Yeah, I just wanted to comment, Matt, when you said that we had that brief sound check. And when I was in the National Symphony, this is an orchestra that goes on tour almost every year, all over the world. So when you're around those older colleagues in the orchestra, I was the newbie, but most of the people are just like, "Oh God, not another sound check. I know what I sound like. I don't need this," Whereas when we went to the Kennedy Center, all of us were so excited to have that chance to step in there. And that, again, that speaks to the different kind of intensity that I think, because we're experiencing that on stage, it definitely has a translation to the audience. They pick up on that undercurrent. And I think that's part of the reason why that performance was so successful.
Well, let's talk about the audience for a moment, because there we were, for those that don't remember, it was a Tuesday night, which is not exactly the marquee position necessarily that one would think for a concert, and yet the place was full. The place was absolutely full. The Boulder Philharmonic, which I'm sure most people in the DC area had not heard of, and had not been familiar with, playing music that, a lot of it was unfamiliar. Of course, there was a Copland's Appalachian Spring, but the other works on the program were undoubtedly unfamiliar. And yet the place was, it was packed, and there was an incredible energy. Maybe Charles Lee, you want to address that? There just was something that we were getting back from that audience, it felt like to me, on that evening.
Yeah, it was I don't know how many people the Kennedy Center seats, maybe Chaz knows, but it looked a pretty decent crowd, packed, and it was morale boosting and fun. This element of having fresh energy and excitement, and everybody essentially coming across to the audience as being really happy to be there to do what we do. I must point out, that's something that we hear often in general, isn't it? The Boulder Philharmonic often, I receive compliments from the audience saying, that's the part that they notice, that there's a joy on stage. Perhaps it not being our day job, in fact, makes it exciting and a privilege to musicians of Boulder Philharmonic in general every time we do get together. That combined with the very high level of playing that my colleagues mentioned a few minutes ago, for me, it was not a surprise to me that we sounded so great. Seeing that, the very people here, these are musicians that are top caliber, right? That I wouldn't be surprised to see in any other top level big budget orchestras, Maestro included. So elements of it felt home. The audience, the Mackey Auditorium seats probably 1,800 or something like that, our home. And we get together once in a while, and we receive pretty big crowds. And so, not to sound spoiled, but I feel like as a member of the Boulder Philharmonic, I'm used to seeing a festive environment filled with lots of people in a beautiful place, presenting an idea that's fresh, and perhaps including some pieces that are not very well known, and the dancers, the aerial dancers being there, that was obviously a real jewel in the crown. I received a lot of comments about that. It was fun sitting on stage at Kennedy Center and feeling the wows and the oh my God. I think one of your dancers, Nancy, did a tumbling move that looked a little dangerous, and did the gasp in the audience. Really, things like that, boosts those musicians who are on stage, of course. So yes, definitely high energy, big crowd, and real festive, fun environment. But I hate to sound arrogant, but I feel like that's what we're used to. I feel like that's it's the thing I miss right now with this coronavirus. I can't wait for it to be done so we can return with, I don't know, something extra. I hope you have something cooking in the idea box there, Michael.
Well, we got some good stuff. We got a couple things, frankly, that were just postponed that we want to be sure to share. One of them, of course, was another collaboration with Frequent Flyers, the Butterfly Lovers Concerto that Chaz was to play the solo on, and that Nancy's dancers were to present in a choreographed version. So that was to have happened a couple weeks ago, and it will happen again in the future as soon as we can make that as soon as it's possible to do so. Let me ask you, Nancy, if I could for a second. We talked about our experience at the Kennedy Center. How about for your dancers? Because at Mackey Auditorium, there is a certain set of dimensions, there's a certain height, right, that you're dealing with. The Kennedy Center Concert Hall is a different place. It's at a different altitude. It's also, you got different dimensions. What was that adjustment like, or was there much of an adjustment for you to be there?
Well, speaking of altitude, we were at sea level, which was delightful for the dancers, especially because they were doing, they did 3 runs in one day, basically, and the piece is killer on the dancers. So they were really grateful to have extra oxygen. But the performance that we did was melded with a 40-foot steel truss. So, and it was hung at the exact same height at the Kennedy Center as it was at Mackey. So our dimensions didn't shift tremendously. It was more, well, it was many things, but in Mackey, as you all know, the proscenium opening is huge and it looks out into that beautiful theater. Kennedy Center's proscenium opening is even bigger and it's, square and not curved and all of that. So the feeling of the dancers in the air, they feel like they're really, really, really high off the ground because, well, first of all, they're above the stage and then the stage drops down even further to where the seating area is. And then they're looking out into the house where all the audience is. So they have the sense of being really in space in a way that in our rehearsal we cannot mimic at all. Luckily, we had done Mackey, Saturday night, got on the airplane on Sunday and performed Tuesday in Kennedy Center. So they were amped up in general, but had just had the experience of being at height in Mackey. So it wasn't like going from our 21-foot ceiling where we rehearse to being rigged at 30 feet, which is where we were for Mackey and Kennedy Center.
Well, I mean, there's no question that ingredient, we had a number of collaborative ingredients. We had a brand new work by composer Stephen Lias. It was based on Rocky Mountain National Park with some beautiful photography. We had a mandolin concerto called From the Blue Ridge. And then, of course, we had this, we had a piece called Ghost of the Grasslands. And then this Appalachian Spring collaboration with Frequent Flyers. But there's no question that particular element, I think, was the most distinctive and the most bolder, the most unique, the most somehow different than really what most orchestras are able to do. Let me ask some of the musicians here. I mean, I am grateful for the video because I can finally see what the dancers were doing because I had my back to them the whole time. All of you, of course, had to play some very complicated music. Appalachian Spring is familiar, but it is a difficult piece. There's a lot of mixed meter. There's just stuff, you have to be on top of it. You have to be totally locked in. Was there any, could you see what the dancers were doing? Were you, I don't know, was it distracting? Were there moments when you just had to sort of block it out so that you could focus on what was that experience? Or what is that experience like? Yeah, Deke, I guess first.
Yeah, I definitely realized early on in our rehearsals, the first rehearsals where the Frequent Flyers were there with us, that watching them is going to be a bad idea for me. like this is dangerous because it was so visceral and like you could empathize with this tumbling body over no net and this thing, and it was scary. I mean, it was actually like gasping and then losing count. I mean, yes, it's a complicated piece. There's such a simplicity in Copland and the beauty of it and the simple gifts melody that comes later. But a lot of the piece is it takes a lot of concentration and it's very difficult. And so I said, I have to not look and maybe that means not even look at Michael because my eyes might get distracted. Sorry.
Okay.
but it was like, keep count, keep in the zone, because yeah, it was difficult. And my colleague I was mentioning earlier that saw the video, he was like, was it hard to play with them? I was like, yes, because we wanted to look and
Yeah.
human nature. So yeah.
Leslie, did you have something?
Yeah, very, very similar experience to Deke. I also, well, unfortunately, for me on the trumpet, I have to look at Michael. I have no choice, because, you know, I gotta. But that I would just sort of like look up just enough to see him, and then that was all, because otherwise it was like, it was so cool, first of all, just to see those dancers doing all that stuff. I mean, it's really easy for me to just become distracted, but like Deke was saying, Copeland is really oddly hard. It doesn't sound hard to listen to it, but to play it really is. And unfortunately, on the trumpet, you can hear all of those notes that I play, so I have to play them in the right place. And so yeah, I really I really had to work to concentrate. Definitely.
Yeah. Yes, Charles. I think Charles wanted to say something, and now I think he's a little frozen, at least on my end here. Yeah, Deke? No. Okay. You were just imitating. Well, he's still frozen, at least for me. Yeah. Yes, Nancy.
I would just say that maybe what we need to do for any other collaborations, including if we can get Butterfly Lovers Concerto to happen, is that we do a run where we're doing it to the recording so the musicians can watch it once. Because it kind of breaks my heart a little bit that you all don't get to see what we're doing. The video doesn't really give it justice. Oh, look, Charles is sideways. That's
Yeah,
awesome.
Charles, how you doing there? You look a little askew. Perfect.
I don't know what's going on with my technology.
There we go.
What? There you go.
Yeah, we're excellent.
So innovative, Charles. You're so innovative.
Well, I've got just a couple of minutes left in this conference here. So let me just ask this. Were any of you involved in the chamber music that happened around the tidal basin? It wasn't just the Kennedy Center performance that was part of this residency. There was a symposium that Kevin Schuck was a part of, our executive director. There were some musical hikes that Dave Sutherland, our naturalist, led at Rock Creek Park. And I think Frequent Flyers actually, did you not perform as part of some of those, if I'm not mistaken, Nancy?
We didn't. We wanted to, and there were
right. Okay,
complications with doing it. Next time.
We had a number of chamber music groups, myself included, actually, that were around the tidal basin. Were any of you here part of that? I guess not. But we had a woodwind group there. There was a string quartet, and then yeah, piano or keyboard and violin. So there was just a little bit of a taste of in a 2 or 3 day period, what makes the Boulder Phil special. So really what makes the Boulder Phil special is the community and wonderful colleagues like Nancy, and of course all these wonderful musicians that have shared this time with me here today. So as Zoom is telling me that my time is rapidly approaching an end, I just want to thank all of you for taking the time to reminisce with me a little bit. We want to thank all the viewers for checking us out, and we want to just thank you for being part of the Boulder Phil family, and know that we want to get back to performing for you as soon as that's possible. We look forward to that day. So again, thanks for watching. Thanks to all of you, and
Thanks, everyone.
take care. All right. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.